Have you ever looked at someone you thought you loved and suddenly felt nothing? Like you were staring at a stranger? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end, watching someone's eyes change as they look at you. That warmth suddenly replaced with emptiness, and you knew in that moment it was over. What if I told you that what you experienced wasn't a failure of love, but proof that it was never love in the first place? Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychologists, uncovered a devastating truth about relationships that explains why so many people wake up one day feeling trapped with someone they don't recognize, or, worse, someone they suddenly despise. This isn't about communication issues. It's not about growing apart. It's about a psychological mechanism so powerful that it's controlling your attractions, your obsessions, and your heartbreaks without you even knowing it. Before I reveal what Jung discovered, I need to warn you. This might be the most uncomfortable truth you'll ever hear about your relationships. Drop a ready in the comments if you're prepared to see your entire romantic history in a new light. And for those who've been hurt, betrayed, or abandoned, this will finally explain why. Carl Gustav Jung wasn't just Freud's famous student who later became his rival. He was a revolutionary thinker who delved deeper into the human psyche than perhaps anyone before or since. While Freud focused on sexual repression, Jung recognized something far more fundamental about human psychology. We don't see others as they truly are. We see projections of our own unconscious. Jung introduced the concept of projection to psychology, but he understood it far more profoundly than the watered-down version we use today. He didn't just mean that we project our insecurities onto others. He meant that we literally fall in love with parts of ourselves that we've lost connection with, parts that we've repressed, denied, or never developed. And we project these parts onto other people. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung took this further when it came to romantic attraction. He identified something he called the anima in men and the animus in women, unconscious archetypes of the opposite sex that we all carry within us. When a man falls intensely, obsessively, in love with a woman, he's often not seeing ethereal person standing in front of him. He's projecting his anima, his idealized feminine energy, onto her. He's falling in love with a part of himself. And when that projection inevitably fails, when the real person can't possibly live up to this unconscious ideal, the love vanishes as quickly as it appeared. This is why you never truly loved her. You loved your projection of her. Let me break down exactly how this painful mechanism works. First, we all have aspects of ourselves that remain unconscious or undeveloped. For men, this often includes emotional sensitivity, nurturing qualities, and intuitive understanding, traditionally considered feminine traits in many cultures. When a man encounters a woman who seems to embody these qualities, something profound happens in his psyche. Jung described it as an almost magical or mystical experience, what we commonly call falling in love. Studies show that the initial phase of romantic attraction activates the same brain regions as cocaine addiction. This isn't a coincidence. You're not just attracted to the person, you're having a profound psychological experience of reconnecting with lost parts of yourself. Think about your most intense attractions. Remember that feeling of she's perfect or she completes me? That wasn't just poetic language. You were literally experiencing a temporary psychological completion of your own fragmented self. But here's where the pain begins.
No real human being can permanently carry your projection. Eventually, the real person emerges from behind the projection, with all their human flaws, contradictions, and complexities. And when that happens, men typically respond in one of two
devastating ways. Either they become disillusioned and the love vanishes, leading to that moment of looking at her and feeling nothing, or they become controlling, trying to force her to conform to the projection, leading to toxic relationships where women feel they can never be enough. Ask yourself honestly, how many times have you been disappointed when someone showed you who they really were? That wasn't their failure. It was the inevitable collapse of your projection. Jung's concept of the anima and animus goes deeper than most people realize. These aren't just simple archetypes. They're complex, evolving aspects of our unconscious that seek expression and integration. The anima in men typically develops through 4 stages. First is the Eve stage, where women are viewed primarily through the lens of motherhood and nurturing. Second is the Helen stage, named after Helen of Troy, where women are seen as sexual and romantic ideals. Third is the Mary stage, where women take on spiritual significance and are elevated to unrealistic standards of purity and wisdom. The fourth and most mature stage is what Jung called Sophia, wisdom. This is where Aman can see women as complete human beings, neither demonized nor idealized. Most men never reach this 4th stage. They remain trapped in projecting either the sexual ideal or the spiritual savior onto women they encounter. Our culture reinforces these projections constantly. From pornography that reduces women to sexual objects to movies where female characters exist only to help the male protagonist find himself, we're surrounded by training material for immature projection. Think about the women you've been most attracted to. Were you drawn to them as complete human beings? Or were you drawn to how they made you feel about yourself? Were you attracted to specific qualities that you felt were missing in your own life? Jung would suggest that the intensity of your attraction was directly proportional to the power of your projection. And this isn't just a male problem. Women project their animus onto men just as powerfully, often seeking external embodiments of their own unrealized strength, assertiveness, or intellectual potential. The meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed. Carl Jung, but transformation only happens when we recognize the projection and take responsibility for it. Otherwise, we're doomed to repeat the cycle of intense attraction followed by painful disillusionment. There's an even darker aspect to this mechanism that Jung identified: shadow projection. Not only do we project our ideals onto others, but we also project the parts of ourselves that we've rejected, repressed, or denied, what Jung called the shadow. This explains one of the most painful relationship patterns, when intense love suddenly transforms into equally intense hatred or disgust. Studies of divorce and breakup narratives show a fascinating pattern. The qualities that initially attract us to someone are often the same qualities we later cite as reasons for leaving them. Think about it. The free-spirited quality you once adored becomes irresponsible. The ambitious drive you admired becomes workaholic. The nurturing nature you loved becomes smothering. What changed? Not them. What changed was that your projection shifted from your anima to your shadow. This is why relationships that begin with the highest intensity often end with the most bitterness. The stronger the initial projection, the more devastating its collapse. And here's the brutal truth. If you've experienced this pattern repeatedly in relationships, the common denominator isn't that you keep choosing the wrong person. The common denominator is your unconscious projection mechanism. Until you recognize this pattern, you're doomed to repeat it, falling for projections, not people, and experiencing the inevitable pain when reality can't sustain you, run conscious, demands. And I want to be clear. This doesn't mean your feelings weren't real. The emotions, the connection, the sense of recognition, these experiences are profoundly real. What wasn't real was the image of the other person that you fell in love with. Let me share some powerful examples of how this mechanism plays out in real relationships. Michael grew up with a critical, emotionally cold mother. As an adult, he was magnetically drawn to nurturing, emotionally expressive women. His relationships would start with intense adoration. Finally, he had found the warmth he'd always craved. But inevitably, once the relationship became secure, he would begin to feel smothered by the very emotional expressiveness he had initially craved. He would withdraw, creating exactly the emotional coldness he had suffered in childhood. This is classic anima projection, followed by shadow rejection. Michael wasn't loving these women. He was trying to heal his maternal wound through them. Sarah was raised to be the perfect daughter, quiet, accommodating, and always putting others first. She repeatedly fell for confident, dominant men who spoke their minds freely. Initially, she admired their strength and directness, but as relationships progressed, she would grow to resent these same qualities, calling the men selfish and inconsiderate. What was happening? Sarah was projecting her own repressed assertiveness, her animus, onto these men. She was attracted to in them what she couldn't express in herself. David described falling madly in love with Elizabeth after just 2 weeks. He called her his soulmate and the one. He was obsessed with her intelligence, creativity, and spiritual depth. 6 months later, he was completely disillusioned, claiming she had changed and wasn't the person he fell in love with. Had Elizabeth changed dramatically in 6 months? Of course not. David's anima projection had collapsed, and he was finally seeing the real person who could never match the goddess he had projected onto her. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his clinical practice. The more unconscious a person was about their internal anima or animus, the more powerfully they would project it outward, and the more devastating the eventual disillusionment. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung, this is why so many people feel like victims of bad relationships, never recognizing that they are co-creating these painful patterns through their own unconscious projections. Despite this seemingly bleak picture, Jung wasn't pessimistic about love. In fact, he believed that understanding projection was the first step toward the possibility of authentic love. The key lies in what Jung called individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious aspects of ourselves into consciousness. Here's how to begin this transformative journey. First, recognize your projection patterns. What qualities do you repeatedly fall in love with in others? These are likely aspects of your own anima or animus that you've disconnected from. Second, reclaim these projections by developing these qualities within yourself. If you're drawn to creative people, develop your own creativity. If you admire strength in others, build your own strength. Third, approach relationships with conscious awareness of the projection tendency. When you feel that magical falling in love sensation, remind yourself, this intense feeling is telling you more about your own psyche than about the other person. Fourth, and this is crucial, commit to seeing the real person beyond your projections. This means embracing their flaws, contradictions, and humanity rather than trying to make them conform to your unconscious ideal. Finally, understand that mature love is not about projection, but about witnessing. It's not about finding someone who completes you, but about finding someone you can grow alongside as you both work toward completeness within yourselves. Jung himself said that intimate relationships are one of the most powerful catalysts for psychological growth, but only if we use the inevitable conflicts and disappointments as opportunities to recognize and integrate our projections. The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. Carl Jung, this is the paradox of Jungian love. The painful collapse of our projections, if approached consciously, becomes the very thing that makes genuine love possible. So how do we apply Jung's insights in our daily lives and relationships? Here are specific practices to transform your relationship patterns. First, create a projection inventory. Write down the qualities you've been most attracted to in past partners. Then honestly ask yourself, which of these qualities do I need to develop within myself? Second, practice projection recognition in real time. When you feel intensely drawn to someone new, pause and ask, am I seeing the real person, or am I seeing my animus projection? This simple awareness can prevent years of pain. Third, develop your relationship with your inner opposite. Through practices like active imagination, journaling, or dream work, you can begin to integrate your anima or animus consciously, rather than projecting it unconsciously. Fourth, when conflicts arise in relationships, ask the crucial question, what part of myself am I not owning here? What might I be projecting onto my partner that actually belongs to me? Fifth, practice radical honesty, both with yourself and your partner. Share your insights about your own projection tendencies. Create a relationship culture where both people help each other recognize when projection is happening, and perhaps most importantly, develop compassion for yourself and others caught in these unconscious patterns. Projection isn't a character flaw. It's a universal human mechanism that operates until we make it conscious. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. Carl Jung, this compassionate understanding is what allows us to forgive both ourselves and others for the pain caused by unconscious projections in the past. I want to share something personal about my own journey with these concepts. Like many people, I spent years repeating the same relationship patterns without understanding why. I would be intensely attracted to certain qualities, only to find myself frustrated by those very same qualities months later. There was the relationship where I was convinced I'd found my perfect match, only to feel completely disconnected a year later. There was the partner I put on a pedestal, only to feel disappointed when they couldn't live up to my impossible expectations. It wasn't until I encountered Jung's work on projection that I began to see the pattern. I wasn't loving these people for who they truly were. I was loving my own projections, my own anima cast onto them like a film projected onto a screen. This realization wasn't depressing. It was liberating. It meant I could stop blaming others, or myself, for these failed relationships. It meant I could start the real work of integrating these projected qualities into my own consciousness. And most importantly, it opened the possibility of authentic love. Love based not on the intoxicating but temporary experience of projection, but on the deeper, more sustainable practice of truly seeing another human being. This doesn't mean the magic disappears from relationships. In fact, Jung believed that conscious relationships contain even more magic, the genuine wonder of connecting with another person's true self rather than just using them as a screen for our projections. So where does this leave us? If Jung is right, if what we call falling in love is often just projection, how do we move forward? First, share your insights from this video. In the comments, tell me about a time when you recognized a projection in your own relationships. Your story might help others recognize their own patterns. Second, begin your own projection inventory. Today, what qualities have you repeatedly fallen in love with in others? This is the first step toward reclaiming these projections and developing these qualities within yourself. Third, subscribe and hit the notification bell. In my next video, I'll explore Jung's concept of the wounded healer and how our deepest wounds become our greatest gifts, but only if we approach them consciously. Finally, check out the resources in the description. I've linked to accessible translations of Jung's key works, modern psychological research that supports his theories, and practical exercises for working with your own projections. Remember, the pain you've experienced in relationships isn't meaningless suffering. From Jung's perspective, it's an invitation to greater consciousness, a call to reclaim the parts of yourself that you've been projecting onto others. You never truly loved her because you couldn't, not until you learned to love and integrate the disowned parts of yourself that you've been seeking in her. This is Channel Name, where we explore the forbidden truths of psychology that can transform your life. If this resonated with you, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next video.